They built a picture of you before you ever gave them a reason to. That is the part that stings most when you finally understand it. That the distance, the management, the preemptive withdrawal was never really about you. It was about a picture, a composite image assembled from old pain and old evidence, and the nervous system's faithful, exhausting commitment to making sure the past never got the chance to repeat itself. The picture showed someone who would eventually become too much, too needing, too present, the person who, once the relationship reached sufficient depth, would confirm what the avoidant's oldest wound had always insisted was true, that genuine closeness leads to the specific kind of pain that makes closeness not worth risking. You never matched the picture. The architecture kept overlaying it onto you anyway. Every moment of genuine warmth was processed as the early stage of eventual overwhelm. Every expression of real feeling was catalogued as the leading edge of future demand. Every time the connection deepened and you remained steady and patient and genuinely yourself, the nervous system adjusted the predicted timeline rather than questioning the prediction. You were always, in the architecture's assessment, on your way to becoming the thing it was afraid of. And then you became something, just not what it predicted. What you became is the version of yourself that exists when you stop organizing any part of your interior life around the management of someone else's fear. The version that stops reading the room for signals about the avoidant's current comfort level and starts reading your own interior for signals about your own genuine state. The version that stops calibrating the expression of genuine feeling against the avoidant's likely response and starts expressing genuine feeling because it is genuine and you are a person. And genuine feeling deserves expression regardless of how it will be received. This becoming is not dramatic. It does not arrive with the announcement of a decision or the performance of a new presentation. It arrives the way all genuine interior development arrives, gradually, through the accumulation of enough self-knowledge and enough honest accounting and enough experience of what the previous orientation was actually costing you, that the orientation shifts. Not because you decided to shift it, because the evidence became sufficient that staying in the previous orientation required more deliberate effort than allowing the natural movement toward your own genuine center. The natural movement, when it is allowed to complete, produces the fully inhabited version of you, the one that is simply, without management, without performance, without strategic calibration, present. In the specific way that genuine self-possession makes a person present, not loudly, not with the specific quality of someone who is demonstrating anything, with the quiet, solid, entirely non-negotiable quality of someone who is genuinely there, genuinely themselves, genuinely unbothered by the work of being otherwise. To understand what this becoming does to the avoidant, you first have to understand the specific architecture of the fear that was always running. Because the fear was not a simple thing. It was not merely the fear of being hurt, which is ordinary and widely distributed and something the avoidant shares with most of humanity. It was the specific, structurally embedded, operating system level fear that genuine intimacy with a genuinely invested person inevitably produces a specific kind of demand that the avoidant cannot meet, and that the inability to meet it will produce the specific consequence that the original environment trained the nervous system to expect. Withdrawal of care, punishment for inadequacy, the confirmation that genuine need, expressed genuinely, is the thing that makes the person expressing it a burden rather than a welcome. The architecture was built to prevent the sequence from completing, to interrupt it at the point of genuine intimacy, before the demand arrived, before the inadequacy was exposed, before the punishment could be delivered. The deactivating strategies were the interruption mechanism. They kept the intimacy below the level at which the sequence would begin. They managed the distance at the specific level that felt safe, close enough to feel something, far enough to prevent the sequence from initiating. What made you specifically threatening to this architecture was not your behavior, it was your profile. The profile of someone genuinely capable of deep love, someone with real attunement and real patience and real investment in the specific actual person behind the presentation rather than in the managed surface. This profile is the early stage indicator, in the architecture's threat assessment system of the person who will eventually initiate the feared sequence. The deeper the capacity for genuine love, the more certain the architecture was that the demand would eventually come. Here is where the architecture made its foundational error, the error that your becoming is now exposing, with a clarity that is, for the avoidant, genuinely difficult to look at directly. The architecture conflated depth of feeling with inevitability of demand, assumed that someone who loved genuinely would inevitably at sufficient depth become someone who demanded in the specific wound-activating way that the original environment had taught the nervous system to fear. The assumption was never examined. It was simply the conclusion the original evidence supported and the template encoded and the architecture defended without question across every subsequent relationship. The assumption is wrong. Depth of feeling does not produce inevitability of demand in the specific threatening sense. It produces, in someone with genuine self-knowledge and genuine self-possession, something entirely different. It produces clarity, the clear, honest, non-weaponized knowledge of what is needed and what is not acceptable, and what the specific shape of genuine reciprocity looks like when it is present and when it is absent. This clarity is not demand. It does not press against the avoidance edges. It does not make the avoidance emotional inadequacy the center of a crisis. It simply exists, steadily, clearly, non-negotiably, as the honest expression of a person who knows themselves well enough to require what they actually require, without making that requirement a punishment for the person who may or may not be able to meet it. The became version of you carries this clarity. The architecture encounters it and reaches for the template, reaches for the predicted demand, the predicted confirmation of the sequence, and finds instead the specific, unprecedented, template-shattering quality of someone who is not organized around the avoidant at all, whose clarity is directed inward rather than outward, whose requirements are held as self-knowledge rather than deployed as demand, who is, in the fullest possible sense, simply and entirely and non-manipulably themselves. This is what the architecture was always afraid would happen, not the demanding version of you. The architecture had a protocol for that, the self-possessed version, the version that cannot be managed because it is not organized around anything the management strategies can target, the version whose clarity makes the deactivating strategies irrelevant because the strategies require a specific kind of engagement from you to function. The anxious engagement, the hoping engagement, the engagement organized around producing a specific response from the avoidant, and the became version of you simply does not produce that engagement, is not anxiously organized around anything, is not hoping in the direction that the hope management strategies were designed to manage, is genuinely, quietly, completely invested in its own life and its own genuine state, rather than in the question of the avoidant's current emotional temperature. The architecture built its entire operational framework around the assumption that a genuinely invested person would remain genuinely invested in the direction of the avoidant, regardless of what the avoidant's behavior produced. The hoping would continue. The pursuit would regenerate after each withdrawal. The investment would sustain itself on the fuel of the connection's genuine moments, even across extended periods of the architecture's management. This assumption was not unreasonable. It described the pattern accurately for most of the dynamic. Your genuine investment in the connection did sustain itself across extended periods of management. Your genuine care did regenerate after withdrawal. Your hope did persist beyond the reasonable expiration of its evidence base, until it didn't, until the became happened, until the investment found its genuine center, and that center turned out to be yourself rather than the question of the avoidant. And the architecture, whose entire operational framework was built on the assumption of your continued externally directed investment, found itself running its protocols into empty space. The specific quality of what the avoidant experiences when the became version of you is present, when the fully inhabited, self-possessed, completely genuine version of you occupies the same relational space as the architecture, is worth describing in detail, because it is not what the architecture predicted, It is not the specific sequence initiating threat the template was trained to recognize. It is something the template has no category for. It feels, to the avoidance nervous system, like standing in front of something solid, not threatening solid, not the solid of a wall that is pressing toward you, the solid of something that is simply and completely there. That has its own structural integrity independent of what you do or don't do in relation to it. That is not organized around your response and is therefore not producing the specific response-dependent quality of investment that the deactivating strategies were built to manage. The strategies reach for the target and find it has moved, not away. The became version of you is genuinely present, but inward, the center of gravity that the strategies were always orienting around. Your investment, your hope, your orientation toward the question of the avoidant has relocated to a place the strategies cannot access, has moved inside you, to the genuine interior of a person who is now primarily oriented toward their own genuine life, rather than toward the management of the connection. This relocation produces something in the avoidance nervous system that is entirely novel. The threat response reaches for the familiar activation and finds, instead of the expected high-stakes intimacy pressure, something it cannot generate the standard threat response to. A person who is genuinely powerful and genuinely safe simultaneously, whose power is entirely their own and is not directed at the avoidant at all, whose presence is real without being pressing, whose care is genuine without being organized around needing a specific reciprocation in order to sustain itself. The nervous system does not know what to do with this. The template does not have an adequate category for it. The architecture reaches for its protocols and finds them designed for a target that no longer exists in the form they require. And in the gap between the reaching and the finding, in the specific, unmanaged, protocol-free space of not knowing what to do with the became version of you, something happens in the avoidance interior that the architecture has never previously permitted. Genuine curiosity, not the managed interest that the architecture allows through its filtered engagement with people, not the surface-level attentiveness that social competence produces. Genuine, unmanaged, architecturally unmediated curiosity about what the became version of you actually is, about what produced it, about how a person arrives at the specific, solid, non-negotiable quality of genuine self-possession that the became version embodies, about what it would mean to be in the presence of that quality, not as a threat to be managed, but as something to be genuinely encountered. The curiosity is significant because genuine curiosity requires the relaxation of the threat response. You cannot be genuinely curious about something and simultaneously in full threat response mode toward it. Curiosity is an opening. It requires a degree of safety, not complete safety, not the full resolution of the threat assessment, but sufficient reduction of the threat response activation that genuine attention can be directed toward the object rather than toward the management of the object's proximity. The became version of you is producing this reduction, not through any specific action, through the simple, structural reality of being something the threat response cannot accurately categorize as threat. The nervous system keeps assessing, keeps reaching for the threat-confirming evidence, keeps finding the profile that previously triggered the full threat response, and keeps finding, attached to that profile, the specific quality of non-threatening self-possession that contradicts the template's prediction. This contradiction, accumulating across multiple encounters with the became version of you, is doing something at the level of the original template, not rewriting it. Template revision is slow, requires sustained evidence over time, is never completed in a single experience, however significant, but introducing into the template the first genuine crack that the template has ever developed. The first point of genuine uncertainty about whether the prediction it has been generating is actually accurate as a universal claim, or whether it was accurate only as a description of the specific original environment that produced it. That crack is the most psychologically significant thing the became version of you is producing in the avoidant, more significant than the pain of the management strategies failing, more significant than the grief of the rarity recognition, more significant than all the architectural deterioration and suppression failure that the full arc of this dynamic has produced, because the crack is in the foundation, in the original teaching that said genuine depth in another person means the specific threat of the original wound, in the assumption that was never examined, because the architecture's faithful preemptive operation never allowed the examination to occur. You are providing the examination, not through argument, through being, through the direct, lived, neurological level evidence of what the fully inhabited, genuinely self-possessed, became version of a person who loves deeply actually is, which is not the threat, which is not the confirmation of the prediction, which is the specific, direct, template contradicting demonstration that genuine power in a beloved person and genuine safety in their presence are not, as the original wound insisted, mutually exclusive. The avoidant is sitting with this, in the specific, uncomfortable, architecturally unprecedented way of someone whose foundational operating assumption is being contradicted by direct experience and who does not yet have the internal resources to fully integrate the contradiction. The template is cracked but not revised. The architecture is challenged but not dismantled. The curiosity is present but not yet fully permitted. The safety is being registered but not yet fully trusted. This is where the avoidant is, sitting in the crack, in the specific, generative, genuinely developmental discomfort of someone who has encountered something their psychology was not built to encounter and is, slowly, and with many retreats to the familiar management, beginning the process of finding out what to do with it. What you do in the meantime is continue being the became, not for them, for yourself, because the became is who you are now, the fully inhabited, genuinely self-possessed, completely genuine version of yourself that emerged through the full arc of your own development in this dynamic. That is yours. It was built through genuine work. It belongs to you entirely and completely independent of what the avoidant does with the crack it produced in their foundational template. The became is not a strategy for producing change in the avoidant. It is the natural expression of someone who did their own genuine work and arrived at their own genuine center. The change it produces in the avoidant is the consequence of what it is, not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is you, your life, your genuine, fully inhabited, non-negotiably yourself existence in the world. Everything it produces in the avoidant is secondary to that. Everything it produces in you is the whole point. You became everything they were afraid you would be. And in the becoming, you became everything you were always supposed to be, for yourself, completely and irrevocably for yourself. That is the becoming that matters most. The became is not a fixed destination. This is worth establishing before going further, because the narrative arc that this examination has been building, from the hoping, avoidant, organized version of yourself, through the grief and the understanding and the self-knowledge, to the fully inhabited, self-possessed, non-manageable version, can start to feel, if held too tightly, like a completed journey, like the became is a place you arrived at and now permanently occupy, like the development is finished, and what remains is simply the inhabiting of what was built. That is not how genuine psychological development works. The became is real. The self-knowledge is real. The clarity and the self-possession and the genuine groundedness in your own center. All of it is real, and all of it was genuinely built through genuine work. But it is not a state that maintains itself without continued attention. It is a direction of travel that requires continued choosing, not effortful, grinding, white-knuckled choosing. The kind of choosing that becomes more natural with practice, that requires less deliberate effort as the new orientation becomes more habituated than the old one. But choosing nonetheless, the ongoing, daily, sometimes tested commitment to remaining in your own genuine center, rather than allowing the old patterns of organization around someone else's emotional state to reassert themselves. This matters specifically in the context of the avoidance encounter with the became version of you, because the encounter itself can become a test of the became's solidity. The avoidance response to the fully inhabited version of you The curiosity, the crack in the template, the unprecedented experience of genuine power and genuine safety coexisting can produce its own gravitational pull toward the old orientation, the pull of the recognition, the pull of finally being seen in the specific way the dynamic always made you hope for, the pull of the avoidance curiosity feeling like the arrival of what the hoping self was always waiting for. The pull is real, and it deserves honest acknowledgement rather than dismissal, because the hoping self was not foolish. The investment in the connection was not misplaced. The genuine feeling that sustained the orientation toward the avoidant across the full arc of the dynamic was not an error in judgment or a failure of perception. It was the accurate response of a genuine person to a genuine connection with someone who contains something real beneath the architecture's management of it. The pull toward the recognition is the pull of that genuine feeling, responding to evidence that the genuine feeling was seen, that it registered, that it produced something in the avoidant that contradicts the story the avoidance behavior was always telling. But the pull, however genuine, requires the same honest assessment that everything else in this dynamic requires. The assessment that distinguishes between the avoidant's current experience of the became version of you, the curiosity, the crack, the unprecedented felt safety, and the avoidant's current capacity to sustain what that experience is pointing toward. The assessment that holds warmly open to what might be possible while remaining clearly grounded in the evidence of what is currently present. The became version of you is equipped to make this assessment in a way the previous version was not. The clarity and the self-knowledge and the honest assessment capacity that the full arc of development produced, these are precisely what allow the became version to receive the avoidance change response with genuine warmth and honest eyes simultaneously, without the warmth suppressing the honesty, without the honesty suppressing the warmth, both present, both operative, both informing the response in the specific, integrated way that genuine self-possession makes possible. What genuine self-possession makes possible in the specific context of the avoidant encountering the became version of you is something that was never available in the dynamic before. It makes possible a genuine encounter between two people rather than the managed, asymmetric dynamic of one person's architecture regulating the other person's responses as a resource. The became version of you is not organized around managing the avoidance comfort, is not calibrating its expression against the avoidance likely response, is not using the avoidance emotional temperature as the measure of the connection's current health, is simply present, genuinely, clearly, warmly, non-negotiably present as itself. And the avoidant, encountering this quality of presence, is for the first time in the dynamic in a position where genuine encounter is available, where the architecture's management of the dynamic is not producing the anticipated regulatory outcomes, where the template is cracked enough that the automatic threat categorization of genuine depth is not running with its previous efficiency, where something more honest, more genuinely mutual, more actually present on both sides simultaneously, is tentatively, uncertainly, with all the nonlinearity and retreat and return that the avoidance current developmental stage allows, beginning to be possible. This tentativeness is real, and it is appropriate to hold without either rushing toward what it might become or dismissing it as insufficient to merit engagement. Tentativeness in the context of avoidant development is not weakness. It is the accurate expression of a system that is genuinely trying to move in a new direction against the weight of deep habituation. The retreats that interrupt the tentative forward movement are not failure. They are the specific, predictable rhythm of neurological reconditioning that has already been examined at length in this series. They are the 2 steps forward, 1 step back, movement of genuine change rather than the smooth linear progress of performed change. The difference between the tentative, genuine forward movement of actual development and the temporary override of acute recognition is the most important distinction available in this phase of the dynamic. It has been touched on before, but it deserves its fullest examination here in the specific context of the became version of you encountering the avoidance changed response, because this is the phase where the distinction is most consequential. The temporary override looks like this. The avoidant encounters the became version of you, and the combination of the rarity recognition and the template crack and the unprecedented felt safety produces a period of significantly increased availability. The warmth is more consistent. The presence is more genuine. The retreats are shorter and less complete. The approach is more sustained. For a period, days, weeks, sometimes months, something that looks very much like genuine development is occurring, and then the relationship deepens to a new level. The closeness reaches a depth that the temporary override was not covering. The architecture, which had been temporarily quieted by the confluence of recognition and felt safety, reasserts at the new depth with the familiar efficiency of a system that was always present and was never actually dismantled. The retreat comes, perhaps more gently than previous retreats, perhaps with more self-awareness on the avoidance part. But it comes, and the period of increased availability reveals itself as having been the override rather than the genuine capacity. This is not betrayal. It is the honest limit of where the avoidance development currently is. The override was real in the sense that the feelings producing it were genuine. The feelings were not manufactured, but feelings are not capacity, and capacity is what the sustained showing up requires. The genuine development looks different across the same time frame. It does not produce the period of significantly increased availability followed by the assertion of the limit. It produces the slower, less dramatic, but genuinely directional accumulation of slightly more availability over time. Not the override's peak followed by the limit's reassertion, the gradual, incremental, sometimes barely perceptible movement of the limit itself, the threshold of what the avoidant can sustain without the deactivating strategies, engaging moving slowly upward. This movement is visible only across time, only in the comparison of where the dynamic is now relative to where it was months ago, rather than in the comparison of today's warmth to yesterday's warmth. It requires the kind of patient, longitudinal, honest observation that the became version of you is equipped to sustain without losing yourself in it. Because the became version is not organized around the question of the avoidance current temperature, is not daily tracking the warmth index as a measure of the connection's health, is genuinely invested in its own life at a level that keeps the observation of the avoidance development from becoming the primary organizing activity of your interior. This is precisely the quality that makes you capable of being present to the genuine development when it is occurring without mistaking the override for the genuine article, not because you are cold or watchful in a guarded way, because your genuine investment in your own life provides enough internal reference that the avoidance development can be observed accurately rather than through the distorting lens of hope or the equally distorting lens of protective cynicism. What you are in the became version is something the avoidant has never had the opportunity to be in genuine relationship with before, not because previous partners were less than you, but because previous versions of you were not this version. The became version, genuinely self-possessed, clearly boundaried, warmly present without being organized around the question of the avoidant, is the specific relational presence that the avoidance nervous system has been encountering and finding, to its considerable confusion and considerable surprise, genuinely safe in a way it has never found genuine depth safe before. That safety is not something you manufactured. It is the natural expression of someone who is not using the avoidant as a source of regulation, who is not organized around needing the avoidant to be available in order to maintain their own equilibrium, who can be in the presence of the avoidance fear and the avoidance inevitable oscillation without being destabilized by any of it, because none of it touches the genuine center that the became version occupies. This non-destabilizability is the most therapeutic thing you can offer, not as a therapeutic intervention, as the natural expression of genuine self-possession. You are not trying to heal the avoidant. You are not organizing your behavior around producing the conditions for the avoidance development. You are simply being yourself fully and without apology, in a way that happens to provide the most development-conducive relational environment available to the avoidant. The provision is the consequence of the became. not the purpose of it. The purpose of the became, the genuine, non-instrumentalized purpose, is a life that is fully yours, occupied genuinely, invested in authentically, organized around your own genuine center, rather than around the management of someone else's fear. A life in which your extraordinary capacity for genuine connection is directed toward people and purposes and experiences that can actually receive it at the depth you are capable of offering it. This includes the avoidant potentially, if the avoidance development produces the genuine capacity to receive what you offer at the depth you offer it, not the managed version of the receiving, not the partial, architecture filtered, strategically rationed receiving that the dynamic previously produced. The genuine receiving, fully present, fully engaged, the actual interior responding to what you actually are, rather than the managed surface engaging with the presented version of what the architecture was willing to allow through. That genuine receiving is what would constitute the became version of you being met by a became version of them. The version that developed through the full arc of what the dynamic required of their own interior, through the self-confrontation and the rarity recognition and the template crack and the tentative, non-linear, frequently retreating but genuinely directional development of the capacity to sustain what the recognition values. Whether both became versions arrive at the same time. Whether your development and their development reach sufficient proximity to make genuine mutual encounter possible is not something either of you controls with precision. Development moves at its own pace. The timing of two people's genuine becoming is not subject to deliberate coordination. What is subject to deliberate choice is the quality of attention you bring to the question of whether the encounter is genuine or managed, whether what is being offered is the becoming or the override, whether the warmth of the recognition is backed by the behavioral evidence of developing capacity, or whether it is the acute expression of a recognition that has not yet been converted into the sustained work that genuine capacity requires. That discernment is yours. It was built through everything this dynamic required of you. It is one of the most genuinely valuable things the experience produced, not as compensation for what it cost, but as the real, transferable, applicable to everything that follows capacity to know the difference between what is real and what is temporarily overriding real. You have that capacity now, in the became version of yourself. Use it, not as a weapon or a wall, as the honest, self-respecting, warmly open and clearly seeing instrument it actually is. The instrument that looks at what is in front of it and knows, not from hope, not from fear, but from the specific, earned, genuinely grounded clarity of someone who has been through the full arc of this, what it is actually looking at. That knowing is the became's most enduring gift to every relationship that follows this one, whether this one continues or concludes, whether the avoidance development meets yours or doesn't, whether the timing aligns or misses, the knowing remains, yours, completely and irrevocably yours. And it is, in the complete accounting of everything this arc produced, entirely worth what it cost to develop it.